Watch with me for 1 second.
Curtains open. The heart skips a beat. Loud applause. Hold it. The story begins. A story that started 16 years ago. She was born in the arms of her mother, no other support whatsoever. She grew up, slipped from her mother's arms and walked, no other support whatsoever. Low caste, no father, single mother, slums, they all said. Shy and timid, she was labeled, or rather made. Only she knew the truth, the fact that she was scared, scared of raising her voice, scared of making a choice, because choice and voice were never a choice for her. Wait, did I forget to introduce myself? I'm Priyanka from India. But before I go any further, let me tell you something about me and my mother. We were in the dark lanes and alleys of my community that night when and where the Muslims and the Hindus fought with swords. Swords that cut open the chests and bosoms of the families that they are fed from. The screams of death and the streams of blood had silenced me and my mother that night. Silence that was born when I was beaten up on the threshold of my Nana's house because I spoke. I spoke too much as a kid, but was asked to be silent. The silence imposed by others had stabbed my voice until it was silent. Voice was gone. Hope wasn't. I was discovered by somebody who gave me a choice to become part of something big, a choice. A movement with a shared mission, shared vision and shared inspiration. Teach for India.
Sounds like a pretty crazy and highly improbable story. My name is Sandeep Rai. About 10 years ago, made this crazy decision of my own. It's a decision that would probably change the course of my life. I decided to drop my lifelong plans of going to medical school. And instead I decided to teach in a low-income school in Washington, D.C. I still remember the first day of school like it was yesterday. I was standing in front of 35 8th grade boys in the heat of August, and I'm dressed in this suit and tie this day, and I'm sweating profusely. And I'm looking at this group of students in front of me who basically, they have no idea what I'm doing, and I have no idea what I'm doing either. I have no idea what to say. I'm all of 21 years old. And the kids in my class, they were talking, they were shouting, they were doing everything but listening to what I was saying at the front of that room. And I look to the back of the room, and I start to look to the back of the room, and the back of the room seems like it's so far away, even though it's literally the other side of this stage. And I see these two kids in the back of the room, and they have dice in their hands, and they have a radio in the other. And I'm sitting here about to talk to them about cellular biology, and they're sitting here and they're rolling dice in the back of my room. And so I start panicking and I start thinking, and I'm like, man, what did I learn in my training to actually respond to this? And so I stand up straight and I raise my voice, and in as firm of a voice I say, please sit down. And they look at me like I'm a little bit crazy. They say nothing. They ignore me, they keep on going, and they keep on rolling the dice. And I then raise my voice a little bit louder, I get a little bit firmer, I get a little bit more urgent, and I say, I need you to please sit down. And this one kid, he's about 6'3". He stands up, he looks at me, and he gets into this football-like charging stance. And he comes charging at me full speed. And I'm standing in front of the whiteboard and I'm thinking, didn't get trained for this. And luckily, well, my 21-year-old self had some pretty reflexes. And I was able to jump out of the way. But that was day one of school for me, and that was day one of my career in the educational space. Those 2 years that I spent in Washington, D.C., they were probably the toughest and the most transformational years of my life. So transformative, actually, that they led to another crazy decision. In the fall of 2008, I decided to jump on a plane and fly to India, where I would begin fighting for the betterment of underprivileged kids all across this country. I work with an organization called Teach for India, and it is dedicated to not only ensuring that every single child gets the opportunity they need and deserve, but also that we redraw the very social contract that underpins this great country. We serve more than 42,000 kids directly, and through the work of our alumni, we're impacting an additional 115,000 kids across the country. Redrawing the social contract of India. That's a bold statement. And it's one we've probably all thought about many times. In fact, it's one we even heard from earlier today. I'm here today to talk to you about two things that I believe are central to making that happen. One of those is the power of belief. And the second is the power of struggle. I want you to meet Premila. Premila grew up in the slums of Pune. She joined a Teach for India classroom when she was in the 2nd standard. She was just 7 years old. Premila loved going to school. She felt close to her teacher. She was a high achiever. She had a group of really close friends, and she would actually come every single day from her community to that school. Well, when Premila was in the 7th standard, about 5 years after she joined that classroom, she was just 13 years old. She got into an argument with her mother one day after school. And before leaving for the market, her mother allegedly slapped her across the face. And Premila was enraged. Her mother left, and in a moment of anger, she picked up a can of gasoline. She poured it on herself, and she lit herself on fire. 24 hours later, Premila died in a government hospital from 3rd-degree burns. That's the story of Premila. She was 13 years old. Her story is the story of struggle, but it's also the story of millions of India's children. See, we live in a country that has 1.3 billion people and 320 million children. Think about that number, 1.3 billion and 320 million. As the 2nd most populated country in the world, that number, it is enormous. And actually, to help us understand what that means, I'm going to ask the audience with me, even though I can barely see you, to do an activity with us. I'm going to ask every single person in this audience to please stand up. Can we get the lights on the audience as well? Please. Lights. So, I want you to look around you for a second, even though you're looking at a little bit of darkness. And I want you to imagine that this room right here, and all the people in this room, that they represent the 320 million children that live in India today. And actually look around you. Don't look at me, but actually look around you. And this room right here represents the entire population of India's children for the next 3 minutes. Yeah? And now I actually want you to close your eyes. Close your eyes with me for just a minute, if you can. I want you to imagine that you're a 4-year-old little child. Picture that 4-year-old in your head. You could be a little girl, a little boy. I want you to picture what you're wearing. Picture yourself playing outside, perhaps maybe with your mom or with your dad. Picture yourself playing after school. Take a second just to have that 4-year-old child embedded in your eyes right now. Be thinking about that child. Could I ask everyone to please open your eyes? Now I want you to remember that all of you right now represent the 320 million kids that are in India. So I'm going to ask this very first 2 rows right here to please sit down. Just these 2 rows right here. Everybody else still standing, I want you to take a look at who just sat down. What if I told you that the people that just sat down, well, they're the 4-year-old children who will never see the inside of a school. They represent the 4% of our country that will never make it to school. And so could I now actually ask the right half of my room, from here onwards, to please sit down. Just the right half. Everybody from here onwards. You guys stay safe. What if I told you that the approximately 48% of this room that's sitting down represents the 48% of India's 320 million children who will drop out of school before they complete the 5th standard? Folks, I want you to think about that for a second. Those of you that just sat down, you represent the hundreds of millions of children who will never learn to read, who will never learn to write, who will never learn to solve mathematics at a 6th grade level. You'll likely never encounter all of the great books that 6th graders encounter, or all the people in this room have encountered. Okay, could I now ask all the rows in the middle here to also please sit down? You guys stay seated. Everybody that's sitting or standing, please just take a look around you. Take a look at all the folks that have sat. Those of you that have sat down, well, you represent the 76% of India's 320 million children who will drop out before they reach the 10th standard. Let that settle for a second. 76% of our country's 320 million children will drop out before they reach the 10th standard. That's 76% of our future having never made it past the 10th standard. That means you'll never step foot into a college, and you definitely won't have many of the skills that India's top employers are demanding. The rest of you still standing? You're the 24% that were lucky enough to make it past. You can please sit down. Thank you so much. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that all the little children that you imagined when you close your eyes, the overwhelming majority of them in today's India, they just don't stand a chance. It means that the overwhelming majority of the kids you imagined, well, they are kids who will, by and large, live a life that is filled with unimaginable struggle. It means that they, in fact, will have no choice but to struggle. You see, when you're facing a crisis that is enormous as India's, a crisis that literally wipes out 76% of our kids out of the education system, folks, you start to grow a little hopeless. You start to believe that a better world, that it just isn't possible. It's too big to fix. It's too broken to pick up. And our daily lives, well, they reinforce that sense of despair every single day. Every time we see beggars on the roads or kids wandering the streets, we grow more wired to believe that the problem just isn't solvable. Every time we turn on the news and we hear of crises happening across the world, of children dying in Syria and Iraq, of young Tamir Rice being gunned down in the US because of the color of his skin, of people dying because they don't have basic currency. Every time we see one of those examples, it's almost like we can feel the pain. We begin to believe that it's just too much. It's just the way life is. Nothing we could do could ever fix this. It's too broken. We begin to believe that building a better world, well, that it would be too much of a struggle. So now I want you to meet Saurabh. At 23 years old, Saurabh made a crazy decision of his own. After graduating from IIT Delhi and joining a successful consulting firm, he told his parents that he wanted to teach in a low-income classroom for 2 years. While at Teach for India, Saurabh learned that a big reason underlying the 76% dropout rate is a lack of secondary schools. India's government simply doesn't stipulate free government-provided education past the 8th standard. So Saurabh founded one of Pune's first low-income, free-of-charge, high-quality secondary schools, a school that promised to begin reversing the 76% statistic in his community. In just 3 years, Saurabh ensured that 100% of his 61 children not only graduated, but also got accepted into a college or a vocational program. Now meet Ramesh. Ramesh was actually one of Saurabh's children. Before his 8th grade year, Ramesh was among the 76%. He was a child, statistically speaking, that was destined to drop out. Only 24 months ago, you see, Ramesh was one of those kids who graduated from Saurabh's school. Today, he actually studies with Priyanka at the United World College. He's no longer a number. He's now a young adult discovering the world. Now meet Soumya. After getting his master's from Penn State University and working for a software engineer, Soumya decided to move back to India and teach in 56 kids in a 7th grade classroom in Pune. Soumya grew so inspired by Saurabh's example that he decided to open 4 schools of his own. Soumya's vision, well, it's to provide high-quality secondary education for all of Pune's low-income children, so that they too can get into a college of their choice. Soumya, in the next 5 years, he wants to open 20 schools to meet the access for all of Pune's kids. Meet Tarun. After graduating from BITS and spending 3 years at Unilever, Tarun too decided to fight for low-income kids across India. He taught for 2 years in a low-income classroom where his kids put up a production of The Lion King, a musical that literally inspired a city by providing children and showing them what they can do. 5 years later, Tarun now runs an organization called Indus Action. It impacts more than 15,000 children across India, and it ensures that they have access to high-quality private school education. You see, the stories of Tarun, Soumya, Saurabh, and Priyanka, they're stories that are immensely powerful. And they're powerful because they make us want to believe. They make us hopeful. They tell us that struggle and despair, that maybe it's not everything. What if I told you that we now have close to 2,700 Soumyas and Taruns, people who are leading change for disenfranchised children across the country? These are some of India's best and brightest minds, people who have decided to leave their jobs, people who have decided to not pursue the path, and said that they want to basically work towards making India a better place for the next generation. Now, what if I told you that many of these people will now spend the rest of their life fighting for the lives of underprivileged kids? They're leading schools, they're running organizations, they're working as teachers. Some of them are even working within the higher levels of the governments. So what differentiates the stories of Soumya, Tarun, Saurabh, and Priyanka from the story of Premila? Well, here's the thing about struggle and belief. Even if I sat up here and I shared with you the hundreds of examples of change that our leaders are driving across this country, it's the stories of struggle that would still stick with you. And it's because our minds are wired towards struggle. It's not our faults, but they are. Every single day we're faced with a myriad of examples, which remind us that the stories of despair, the stories of hopelessness, those are the ones that are prevalent. That they're the ones that are defining our world. That our country is too broken to fix. That creating a new world would be too much of a struggle. And we're reminded of that hopelessness every single time we turn on the television. And after a point, the stories of belief, well, they become too few. So, what if I told you to bring all this together, that the trick is to hold both? What if I told you the trick is to see both? The power of belief and the power of struggle for what they are. A little over 12 months ago, I flew back to the US to attend a conference. It was one that was hosted by American educator Joel Klein. He's the guy that literally transformed much of New York's public school system. And Klein's about to moderate this panel filled with some of the world's most prominent educators working for low-income kids. And at the beginning of the session, he stands up, and without even blinking, he says something I don't think I'll ever forget. He says, 25 years against fighting the status quo is painful. Fighting the status quo is painful. Don't think it's an accident that we're struggling. It's going to be a struggle. And he continues, his voice getting a bit deeper, and he says, don't ever forget why we struggle. We struggle for the kids who have no choice but to struggle. You see, folks, that's the power of struggle. It's the realization that the fight is worth it. That building India into a better place, it's too important. That all the stories of success I've just told you about, from Soumya and Priyanka to Saurabh and Ramesh, that they are stories that give us belief, but they are also stories that have been filled with immense struggle. They're stories that have been hard, and they are stories that have required sacrifice. And Pradnia's story, well, her story is a reminder. It's a reminder that there's a fight worth fighting for. It's a reminder that we desperately need people to not just believe, but we need people to relentlessly fight for it. It's a reminder that change is hard. And it's a reminder that there are 320 million children who desperately need us to care, who desperately need us not to just believe, but to never forget their struggle. believe that something else is possible. That the stories of Priyanka, the stories of Saurabh, the stories of Soumya and Tarun, that they're not anomalies, but there are hundreds and thousands of them across the country. Our job, folks, is to create exponentially more of them. Today, that number is 42,000. In 5 years, at Teach for India, we aim to make that number 1 million children that we are impacting. And who knows, in 50 years, maybe it'll be all 320 million. Maybe, in fact, just maybe, it'll be an India that's completely redrawn.